Good morning, ladies and coronavirus germs. This is your ticker guy coming at you on the 26th. Well, we're going to talk more political stupidity and then some economic stupidity for those who think that this is not going to be a big and permanent deal. And then we're going to talk coronavirus stupidity, maybe in that order. So let's talk political stupidity first, which unfortunately, as is so much of the case these days, means that the two all intersect. Remember when I used to talk about the interconnections between impeachment and some of the other things, because whether you like it or not, that's just kind of the way the world has been for quite a long time. Political stupidity. Pelosi and her screamers. One of the things that she got into the bill that is going to get supposedly a $1,200 deposit into your bank account sometime in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, we'll see about that. And by the way, most folks do have that data on file with the IRS. It's there. If you had a tax refund deposited into a bank account, which over the last few years, they know where it is, and they can verify whether or not that account data is still good. And so, I mean, electronically transferring funds to you is just a push of a button. Well, isn't that convenient? We don't actually have to have the money first. We can just push a button. Yeah, we can just push a button. I mean, unfortunately, you can't just push a button and, make things like hospitals or cops or fire engines or any of the, or for that matter, drugs. Like hydroxycodone. You can't. You can't just push a button and make things pop out, accept credit to someone's account. You got to wonder how crazy these people are. Anyway, one of the things that got put into that bill, as I was saying, is essentially a forced unionization component that would mean that anybody that took any of their money, any of their bailout money, could not enforce or use state right-to-work statutes. Florida's a right-to-work state. There are a number of others. Tennessee is a right-to-work state. This is one of the reasons that there are auto plants popping up all over Tennessee. It is one of the reasons that you've had, I think it's South Carolina. There are a number of states where they are, and then there's states, of course, where it's not, where forced unionization, closed shops, and things like this are allowed by state law. Well, we have 50 political laboratories in this country, folks, specifically because the ones that do the right things, as measured by people's wallets and people's migration patterns, win, and those that do the wrong things lose. So lose, in this case, doesn't mean revolution. It doesn't mean shooting governors. It or at least it shouldn't, okay? And the reason it doesn't, throughout the history of the United States, for the most part, 1863 being, we've had an exception here and there, haven't we? Battle of Athens, anybody? Oh, no, nobody wants to talk about that. That was a real no bullshit revolt right here in this country. That was when we actually had men left that had a pair of balls, too. It doesn't appear that we have very many of those left in this country. But I digress. The problem with provisions like this in federal bills is that they take yet another whittle off the stick of the 50-state political laboratory model. And eventually you take enough whittles off that stick that it breaks. I don't think that the clowns in D.C. understand the audacity of this kind of action and the consequence. I also don't think they care for the most part. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and those in power always seek to expand the scope and influence of their power. This is human nature. It is not unique to Democrats or Republicans or anybody else. I will point out that it has been legal essentially forever for physicians to prescribe drugs off-label for things other than their original indication. Okay? As an example, in the current paradigm, We have this, hydroxychloroquine. That's the right pronunciation. One of these days I'll actually, I'll find a dictionary, see if it's in there, see if I can get the exact correct one so that I quit butchering it. Anyway, we have doctors that have been prescribing hydroxychloroquine off-label for a very long time for various autoimmune and similar diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis. And this is something that they have been, people figured out that it works for this indication. It's not a panacea. Like all drugs, it has risks. If you overdose on it, it's very bad. Virtually any drug can kill you if you take a large enough overdose. Hell, you can kill yourself with aspirin or Tylenol. And so, that's, and oh, by the way, a fair number, just for reference, this is a little historical quip. During the 1918-1919 Spanish flu pandemic, a number of people did kill themselves with aspirin. It had come off patent, and it was being widely touted as, how you control fever. And of course, people were paying absolutely no attention to the recommended dose levels. And if some is good, more is better, right? Yeah. It killed a fair number of people, which is not shocking. Okay, aspirin. Of course, now you can buy it over the counter. And by the way, aspirin has a very long list of interactions and contraindications too. If you actually tried to bring that to market today, I don't know that you could get it approved. So that's kind of interesting. It's if you look at the historical record on this stuff, you find all kinds of discontinuities that are not cool. Anyway, Cuomo turns around and slams the door on people using hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic and as a presumptive treatment for people who you can't get a test back quickly. And since that's not going to go away anytime soon, there was a doctor who was taking care of a very large Hasidic population in New York. There's several groups up there that are quite homogeneous, quite and Hasidic Jews they're very religious. Anyway, he started a protocol using this which is not approved, and Cuomo slammed the door in his fingers. The thing is that Cuomo wants you to only get this drug if you're in one of his trials that he's running in his hospitals. Well, I hope the people of New York hold him accountable for every single death that occurs because somebody didn't have the opportunity to do this and they end up in the hospital, and then and only then, and oh, by the way, since it's a trial, you may not get the drug. You may be the one that gets the placebo. And by the way, this is not here's a drug against another drug that we know works, because there is no other drug. So the alternative is nothing. Right? I mean, and this is why these kinds of trials in times like this are totally inappropriate. I understand that we'd love to run them in a normal circumstance, but this is not a normal circumstance. And the ability for people to make decisions in concert with their physicians that keeps them out of hospitals is critically important here. We just had another nursing home that ended up being essentially ravaged by this thing. And again, this is more shit eating, which is not something you can really avoid in a nursing home environment. I have long argued that these things should not exist at all in our care paradigm. I understand why they do. I understand what they're a response to and how that works. Okay, trust me. All my grandparents are gone. Both my parents are gone. I'm well aware of the challenges that come up when people get very old and frail, especially if they start having mental or physical compromises that the people that they live with or love cannot handle. I get that, okay? And sometimes that can't handle is a physical thing, and sometimes it's a psychological thing. It doesn't make any difference. Can't handle is can't handle. And so, we have these environments for that kind of a situation. They exist. They're a shitty one when it comes to infection control. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. It's been that way forever. All right. And again, I point out one of the things that I said very early on in this when the Kirkland thing happened, which is that the average life expectancy of somebody who checks into a nursing home is 6 months. All right, so that we're having these things, but boy, oh boy, does this pull on the heartstring. All these grannies being wheeled out in wheelchairs, and some number of them are going to end up dead. Yep, there are. It's gonna happen. That's sad, but it's reality. But here's the question: how many of them did not have a strong contraindication to taking hydroxychloroquine? Okay, how do we know? All right, Bloomberg, by the way, has a story up that says, "Oh no, this doesn't actually work." Well, I don't know if it works. Okay, and I don't think anybody knows if it actually works. You got, here's the thing. You got another journal out of China that says, well, they tried it and it didn't work. Okay, so you got, you got these people. It was a little study. It was 30 people, 30 patients. 15 patients got the drug. 13 tested negative after a week. 15 patients didn't get the drug. 14 tested negative after a week. The results, that's statistically indistinguishable. But that's all they got was that one. They didn't take the other one, azithromycin. We didn't have that one. But in France, it said the other way along, okay, and looked good. And, why can't a doctor give you the alternative? It's your ass. When you get down to it, it's your ass. Okay, it's not their ass, it's your ass. And by the way, the Chinese study didn't show any evidence that it made anything worse. Okay, by the way, what is the alternative treatment? Well, it included bed rest, oxygen, presumably through a cannula or probably a cannula, which is a non-invasive thing that you could do in your own house. So lay in your bed, inhale oxygen, and lopinavir and ritonavir. Two antivirals. So the alternative treatment was that it didn't combine those. So, but wait a minute. Lopinavir and ritonavir are not primary frontline FDA-approved coronavirus treatments. So that's a little misleading, isn't it, Bloomberg? Yeah, more than a little misleading. So basically, we have two sets of drug therapies, neither of which is approved by the FDA, both of which appeared to have worked as well as the other. Very interesting. One of the patients in that study over there progressed to severe disease. In other words, oh shit, right? But 4 patients given the medicine developed diarrhea and possible liver damage. Well, maybe, but over what period of time? See, that's the thing is that, and by the way, liver damage is a known risk when this drug is used for malaria prophylaxis or in people with RA. But we take that risk voluntarily because the alternative is worse. Well, what's the alternative here? I mean, if this thing progresses to severe disease and you end up on a ventilator, the odds are you're going home in a box, which sucks. All right, so how about people have the right to attempt either prophylaxis or their own interventions? And again, not on folks. We're not talking about making this stuff available at the counter. It's way too dangerous to do that. You'd be insane to stick this stuff on a drugstore shelf and let anybody buy it that wants it. All right, you'd be out of your effing mind to do things like that. It's nuts. But yeah. We're not talking about that. And yet there's so many people running around thinking that it is. We still got the media scaremongering about this thing about the couple that literally drank fish tank cleaner. All right? As I pointed out, that's like drinking toilet bowl cleaner. It's stupid. Do stupid things, win stupid prizes. But physicians should have the unfettered ability to try things with the consent of their patients, or if their patients ask for it, when you can't offer them a mainline treatment alternative that has a good chance of success and is known to work, which is where we are right now with this thing, whether you like it or not. All right. Second thing, there is now a growing list, gee, isn't that funny, of scientists, people with lots of letters after their names, microbiologists and things like this, that are saying, hey, wait a minute, these numbers that everybody's talking about, doom and gloom and apocalypse now, do not add up. They do not make sense, and we are doing critical damage to the economy without evidence, which is what I've been saying. Not only are you doing it without evidence that that you will actually get somewhere, but you're doing it without evidence that this thing was as bad as is being prognosticated. In fact, one of the biggest screamers that ultimately informed the UK's and everybody else's decision to lock everything down, this supposed epidemiological study that said that we were all going to die and that we could have 10 million people in the United States fall over dead. The people responsible for that have now come out with something very quietly that whacks several zeros off those numbers. Wait, what? Several zeros? Oh, yeah, like 3. Has that gotten the same amount of press as the original proclamations did? No, it hasn't. And yet, 3 zeros is a lot of zeros, isn't it? I mean, look, if don't get me wrong, 10,000 dead people is a lot of dead people. But for some perspective, it's not uncommon for us to have 60,000 dead people from seasonal flu over the course of a flu season. 10,000 more is kind of shitty, but it's not a national catastrophe. Even 100,000 more is not in the realm of national catastrophe. I remember, 60,000 is normal, right? 100,000 more is not a national catastrophe. Is it bad? Well, yeah, nobody's saying it's good, right? Nobody's saying that. But turn off the entire effing economy? Are you crazy? All right, a couple other points. One on prevention of transmission. And this one's also not being talked about. There is some evidence that all this PPE stuff isn't exactly scaremongering, but it's not effective, and that we're actually doing, in many cases, is concentrating this virus and community spread through hospitals. Oh, I know you say, oh, no. All these people, they follow all the rules. Well, folks, you're wrong about that. So there is some evidence coming from our Asian friends that the following protocol was essentially 100% effective, very close, not exactly 100, but close enough, to preventing healthcare workers from getting the bug, which was the primary goal, because if you start quarantining everybody in a hospital that comes in contact with another healthcare worker that happens to test positive, you're very soon going to end up with no doctors and no nurses. And then you've really got a problem, because everybody is having to stay home and stay away. All right, so here is what they found. The protocol is this. You wash your hands with soap before and after each patient that you see, okay? And you wear just a regular surgical loop mask. If you do, when the patient gets up, the thing that he was sitting on, you don't use these disposable papers or whatever, the surface gets cleaned, and then that person immediately washes, whoever does it, whether it's the nurse or an orderly or environmental services, and then they immediately wash their hands. No exceptions, every single time. Now, we have been told that this virus is extremely easy to contract through ordinary airborne transmission, not from somebody coughing and sneezing or being intubated. But good God. For those events, for highly mobilizing aerosol events, treatment modalities, you wear the full garb. You do the whole 9 yards, because there, Man, oh man. All right. All right. But otherwise, no. And here's the other thing. If you find that a person has been in a room or at a range of a few feet from somebody for up to 30 minutes without a mask on, they do not need to be isolated or quarantined. Now, we have all been told that if you've got it and I do not keep a 6-foot distance from you, that I am very likely to get it from just ordinary vapor phase transmission. In other words, you're not coughing, you're not hacking, you're not blowing virus particles all over me. No. Just from that, I am at very high risk of getting the virus. They found an essentially statistically zero transmission rate by following that protocol. Right? Zero. Now, that's rather interesting, isn't it? In other words, their healthcare workers aren't getting sick. All right, so what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that one of my original theories, which is that a lot of this is shit-eating, is in fact true. Person gets up on the exam table, there's a little bit of feces on their butt, it gets spread around a little bit, all you got to do is come in contact with that, and crap, right? All right, same thing with any large city. You're not going to control this by wearing masks out in public, folks, because that's not how the spread's happening. Most of the spread is happening oral fecal. And unfortunately, when you've got public transit, I don't know how in the hell you stop this as long as you have a bunch of shit eaters in your society. So when you have these people most of whom are imports, okay, let's face it, and folks, among some of us too, okay, come on, how many people are fastidious about making sure that any time that our hand goes anywhere near our butt, the next place it goes is a sink with soap and water, okay? Not all that, not all that often, all right? I mean, we don't do it enough. But in a clinical setting, if you do that, the transfer rate goes to an effective zero. Now, that's very interesting because this means that no, the problem isn't the sort of spread that we all have been told it is, all right? The problem is that we have a bunch of crap eaters in our society and in large cities and places where you have common contact with things like subway car handrails, escalator handrails, elevator buttons, this kind of thing, that it only takes one, and here we go, off to the races. This also explains why it appears that so far Mexico did not get an explosion of cases out of their music festival. Now, we're a little early to make that as a definitive statement, but it completely explains why that didn't happen. It explains Japan. Because the Japanese are fastidious about this sort of thing. They tend to not be shit eaters at all. All right? It explains a number of things. It explains how we ended up with a big cluster of transmission in South Korea because those crazies in the church, essentially, for all intents and purposes, intentionally spread it. And it explains some of the other data we're seeing. Look, it explains UK, it explains Italy, where you have a whole bunch of people, essentially a bus running people who do not have white man sanitation good practices all over the country and bringing them into the country en masse, as do all of our sanctuary cities. Gee. And it explains the nursing homes. Because nursing homes are a place where you have a very high percentage of people who are incontinent, and that means that people are coming in contact with shit, and that there is an aerosol route there. And no matter how good you try to be in that regard, well, they're not being good enough. Why? Because infection control protocols in nursing homes suck. They always have. It's a good thing this thing isn't really deadly because we'd all be fucked. But then the other thing that goes with this is antibodies. We now have a few people that are starting to do this on a survey basis. Apparently the UK is going to do it on a wide-scale survey basis, not among people that appear to be sick, but just on a survey basis. This is critical data, folks. Absolutely critical. All right? And governments can do this relatively quickly because the number of tests you need to run for statistically significant results is not crazy. It's not 100. You'd get interesting anecdotal results out of 100 sample, and I would be willing to do that and do it around here and even fund it if I had to, if I could get the tests. And that brings me to the last point and the thing that I promised I was going to out of the bag today, and that is this. It takes time from when you isolate a viral strain to come up with the chemical multipliers, if you will, to be able to produce a strip-style test, much like you use for pregnancy or whatever, except that uses urine, of course, because what you're looking for is in the urine. In this case, it's a blood test because you're looking for antibodies, which are in the circulatory system. That's the best place to collect them. And so you'd stick your finger, and you take a drop of blood and a reagent, and then that goes through a chemical amplification process, and you get bars across an indicator, much like you do with a pregnancy test. Okay, you have a control that has to show up, otherwise the test is not valid, and then you have your bars for the antibodies. In this case, there's 2 that are produced. All right. So the problem with this test is it takes some time to develop. Why? Because after you have the RNA, then you have to identify the specific reagents and process. And then once you have it identified, then it has to go into production. Right? This cannot happen instantly, folks, because you think you have it, then you've got to validate it. All right, and in order to validate it, you need the antibodies. So from the time that you have the RNA sequencing and the antibodies that are produced, it probably, and I've been talking to some people about this. This is a few month process, 3-4 months. Well, guess what? There's 2 companies that claim that they have this test. One of them that claims that it's available for clinical and research use now, not home use. In other words, as an ordinary person, I can't buy them. Not that it's illegal to have them, they just won't take the order. So where's that company? Where's the material coming from? Well, it's coming from China. How is it that China has this test at a production level? And by the way, they used this test in Wuhan before they reopened their economy. How'd that happen? How'd they get it? Are you asking the right questions yet? So China only knew about this thing being a serious problem early, February-ish, right? And yet here we are, a month later, and all of a sudden, China has figured out how to violate the laws of physics and use a time machine to come up with testing materials that nobody in the United States can replicate in less than 3 months or thereabouts. Folks, are you still buying this bullshit? If China not only knew about this thing, but knew what the sequencing was far before anybody was told, because remember, we were given this timeline when the first sequencing was done out of China, because that was where it started, right, supposedly. The only plausible explanation for this test existing at this point in time in China, right now, today, and now, of course, now that that's been figured out, somebody gets their hands on one, they can duplicate it, because that's not too hard once you know what it is. The only plausible explanation is that they knew about this long before they let on. Long before. Not a little before, long before. Not only did they know that there was a virus running around, they knew what the virus was, and they knew what the RNA was. And we know, factually, that the Chinese ordered much information early on destroyed. And there's some doctors that disappeared too. There's one in particular who got the virus and died. That's a really shitty way to go. But there are also some others who, they just don't seem to be around anymore. I wonder what happened to them. They have an unfortunate anti-aircraft fire accident. Stop believing the line of bullshit that's being spewed from people that this all started back at the end of January into February, folks. It most clearly did not. And because if that was the case, there is no possible way that these tests exist, and yet they do. I found 2 websites, and one of them I know traces to China. So there you go. Accountability, folks, it will be time for that. But in the meantime, just know this. The screaming and the scaremongering is now being questioned by not just people who are called kooks like myself, and, oh my God, you are going to kill Granny. No. We're now getting an awful lot of people with letters after their name. They're saying the same thing. that oops, those models are wrong. Well, gee, I told you that after Diamond Princess, didn't I? What, you mean you finally woke up and stopped drinking the damned Kool-Aid and started paying attention where the data actually takes you? It's about time. Let me check a guy every day.